Greetings! Welcome to another tutorial about Bloomreach XM with XIN Mods. In this video, we're going to talk about writing more complex dynamic queries for Bloomreach XM using the XIN Mods Query API. Let's get into it. While the query we wrote in the last tutorial works just fine, oftentimes a query is based on dynamic information, like the category someone is in, or perhaps filters and search terms on a search page. In XIN Mods, there are two main ways you can make your queries more dynamic. You can use an inline if statement, or you can build a query by chaining clauses as the code executes. We're going to have a look at both of them. So let's try and rewrite our query in such a way that we can dynamically build it using either approach. Let's have a look at using the inline if statements first. If you remember, this is what the query was we wrote last time. So we build a query string, then that query string is inserted into the execute query function, which asks Bloomreach for the results. So let's disable this for now, and let's try and just debug what we're doing using the output of the query string. If you remember last time, we said we can query for any of these ingredients by using OR. Garlic exists or onion exists. The other way is we can say all of these must be available by using AND. So garlic exists and onion exists. Now, let's pretend we have a little object that describes the state of what we're trying to search for. So let's call it options, and let's add two types of options. So if all is true, then we must use AND. If it's false, then we must use OR. And we want to have the keywords in here: garlic and onion. And we'll use this one later. First, we're just going to use this one. So I mentioned before, we can use an inline if statement. After the where clause begins, we can say, if a certain expression is true, then given the query clause, do this, or given the query clause, do that. So in our case, if options.all equals true, then we must use AND. So we say Q and these options. If it's not true, we want to use OR. And that's pretty much how easy it is. Sometimes you don't want to have an else clause. In that case, you can call the no operation function instead. Great. So, but for now, let's try this out. Okay, so set to false, which means it should be OR, which is correct. Now, if we set this to true, hopefully it will go down the other path. And yes, it does. So depending on the value of this expression, it either adds these elements to the query or these ones. And you can have as many if instructions as you want. You can even also nest them inside here if you want. That's no problem. It's all just part of the chaining mechanism of the query API. This function comes in handy quite often. Sometimes you just don't want things to be part of the query if they don't apply based on the context of the options object. When things are a little bit more complicated, you might want to try the approach we're going to be talking about now, which is to build a query by chaining clauses as the code executes. And the reason why this is kind of the last thing that you want to do is because it does make the query a little bit less readable. So instead of having all our instructions sitting between .where and .end, we can actually specify a clause that has been built previously as the contents of the query. And what you can do is you can create a separate where clause object by asking your connection object to create a new clause of type where. The other ones that exist are or clause or and clause. But for now, this is the base we always want to start with. Then what we want to say is, okay, inside this where clause, we're going to have a keywords clause. And depending on whether options.all is true, we want to create an end clause, or we want to make an or clause if options.all is false. Great. So keyword clause is now the instance of an expression, the clause expression, generated by this method or this method. Now what we can do is for each of the keywords that are in the array of the options, we can go ahead and use this new keyword clause to do something. So in our case, we still want to say contains, but this has all the other operators that were discussed in the previous tutorial as well. Great, so let's go contains. Remember correctly, it's XIN Mods ingredient, XIN Mods string, and then the value of the keyword. Great. So we've created a where clause. We've added an and or an or clause to it based on the context. And for each of the keywords, we've added the contains dynamic, which means that if, we have more ingredients that we want to query, we can just add to the array instead of changing the complete query. Great. So the last thing we have to do is tell our query object where the where clause begins. So we use our where clause object here. Now, if we run the code, hopefully, there you go. There you see. We have the where clause, we have and. If we change it, it's or. Great. And if we add more values, it will automatically add them. Great. So that is how you can either make a query more dynamic by using an inline if statement, or by chaining clauses together and wrapping it with normal JavaScript code. Great. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of thing, check out the playlist that popped up on the screen. And if you want to be notified when a new tutorial appears, make sure to subscribe. See you next time.